So I'm Andy Williams. I'm a producer and director that's worked in kids and family entertainment for about 25 years. I started at Disney Channel working as a promos director and producer, and have worked for the BBC, Nickelodeon, Aardman, and many others. I've recently finished production on an animated streamer for an animated series for one of the streamers, and am now in active production on an animated feature film that will have its cast announced at the American Film Market next month and will be premiering at the end of next year. That's me, with very young me, with a BAFTA there for a series I produced for Disney called Brushhead, and have also worked on Shaun the Sheep and various other animations. Now, I give you all of that background because I've got a lot of experience in the traditional funding and distributing model for TV production, but that model is kind of under a lot of pressure, and the old way of doing it is breaking down a bit. But let's have a look at what the old model was. So the old model is what I'd call pitch and pray. You come up with an idea for a show, or you option a book property, and once you have those rights or you've created that format, you go to a broadcaster and you beg for a meeting. And then if you get a meeting with the broadcaster, you show them the pitch. You might have an animated test that you've done. You might have commissioned a pilot script from a writer, and you hope that they believe in you and they believe in your idea. And then you wait. Now you wait months and months, maybe even years, and hope that you get a green light from a commissioner. Even if you do get funding, which makes you in a really select group of people, it may be that you get all of your funding, or more than likely you get a part of the funding, and then you go to other people to try and complete that financial jigsaw puzzle. But it's a long process. And I've just come back from Cannes, where there's a TV and film market, MIPCOM. The industry is going through a lot of challenges, and what you're finding is the traditional broadcasters and commissioners have less and less money and are getting more and more risk averse. And so that means that this system that was challenging anyway is becoming more and more difficult. And so what a lot of creators are doing, and it's what even veteran producers are thinking about doing now, they're looking at skipping and sidestepping that traditional route to funding and going directly to the audience. And I'm just going to take you through a couple of case studies. Now, one of the things that, along with being a producer, that I do is that I'm a co-host of a podcast called the Kids Media Club Podcast. And then we get to each week talk to a lot of producers, animators, and directors working in the industry. And it gives us quite an up-to-the-minute view on trends and strategies that people are deploying now. And I'm going to just take you through a couple of case studies for people that are deciding to move away from that traditional system of funding and that relationship with the broadcaster, and exploring new, quite disruptive strategies. First case study is a show called Bad Dinosaur. That is an animated series that was produced by a company called Snafu Pictures, Dan Dixon and Paul Schleicher. And they created the original show on YouTube, where it wasn't just a proof of concept, but they were able to establish a proof of audience as well. With that audience data, they could then go to Netflix, and they didn't just have the animation to show Netflix to persuade them, they also had the audience data to show that it had a broad audience appeal. And that gave them more leverage in terms of how to negotiate that. Netflix then came and commissioned the whole series, and the traditional way that Netflix ordinarily typically works is that Netflix likes to, if possible, acquire all of the rights. So the exchange is that Netflix commission a series, and then you have very healthy budgets. So they have a reputation for paying better than any of the other broadcasters. But the exchange that you get for that is that Netflix then own that show. So Snafu decided to take that deal, and then they were working on that series for Netflix, which is that's still an incredible opportunity. And you're in an elite position to be able to have got that chance to make that series. Everyone gets very well paid. They don't have to compromise on their vision. They get to do the show that they've wanted to make. So that's one way of a producer using YouTube and social media to kind of establish a proof of audience as well as a proof of concept. The other case study is a show called The Amazing Digital Circus, and now they took a slightly different approach. They're an Australian production company, and they again went to YouTube as their first network, their first platform, and they produced their first episode on YouTube, and within the first month on YouTube it got around 200 million views. And so they were able to then go back to Netflix, or in some ways it caused such a sort of sensation that they were almost approached by Netflix. And they could then negotiate with Netflix from a position of more power. And they decided to take a different approach to the Bad Dinosaurs producers. They decided that they already had that audience, and they didn't feel that they necessarily needed to have a commission from Netflix. They were much happier to license the show to Netflix. So they were able to license their series to Netflix while at the same time still keeping it on YouTube. And that gave them extra revenue from the license fee, but they owned that series and that brand, and they could still produce it. Now, the problem that Bad Dinosaurs encountered is that they got a second commission, but then at that point, Netflix decided that they weren't going to commission a third series. But because Netflix owns the show, they're not able then to do anything more with that series. Whereas The Amazing Digital Circus is in a much stronger position because Netflix could decide that they don't want to continue licensing the show, but they'd still have the ability to produce that show and make that show. So it's a great example of how they really leveraged the power and the proof of YouTube to kind of build a brand that gave them a position of real negotiating power and allowed then the independents to really keep that show. So the next case study is a company that's produced a show called Claynosaurs. Claynosaurs was produced by a team of veteran Hollywood animators. So they're people that really understand the business of animation, but they decided that the old way of doing stuff wasn't working. And so they went directly to all of their collected fan bases and decided to crowdfund all of the animation. So they started small, and they had NFT collectibles, they had merchandise, and they sold that to then crowdfund their animated series. And again, like The Amazing Digital Circus, they've managed to retain ownership of it, and they're building what could be a multi-million-pound franchise, an IP, but they don't need to then sell that and have that owned by the network. And one of their strategies for doing that is that they talk a lot about how they're in the fan building business. So they're looking for ways to over deliver for the fans and really reward that loyalty. So they're as much about building and strengthening that community as they are about just producing a TV show. Yeah, and it's worked for them. It's created a lot of fan loyalty. The fans can collaborate on an episode, and they really feel part of that journey. The other one that I wanted to use as a case study was Silly Crocodile. Now, Silly Crocodile was created by a YouTube creator called Corey Williams, and he had a background as a successful live action YouTube creator. But he created this toy character to play with his daughter, and he decided that there was something to that character, and he wanted to then turn that into an animation. And he utilized new technology. So he used Unreal Engine, which is an animation software that he learned himself just for the purpose of creating the series. And it meant that he kept his costs very low. He was able to, the cadence of producing for YouTube tends to be very fast and rapid. And he was used to having something come out every week. But Unreal Engine allowed him to do an animated series and have it be released on a weekly basis. And that's something that was always a barrier for animation on YouTube, but he was able to do that. And he's already had an offer, a $5 million offer for the IP, which is turned down. And again, that combination of the relationship with the audience and the low cost of their technology and the speed, that gives a lot of creators independence to not necessarily be completely beholden to that channel or studio relationship. So this is just a quick kind of profile on Bad Dinosaurs, Claynosaurs, and Silly Crocodile that are both using that YouTube strategy to kind of build proof of concept, but also crucially proof of audience. And in terms of the way that all of these creators are marketing their shows, they're taking a very transparent view on production. They're allowing all of the audience in to be part of that creative journey. So this is a stop motion animator called Kevin Parry, and he uses his behind the scenes footage as both content and marketing and a way to make everyone feel like they're part of that journey. And it's a key part of all of these creators' attitude that they're very transparent in terms of the production process, which wasn't traditionally the way that traditional broadcasters have had more of a distance between that. So what is the path for new creators? There are 4 paths to kind of building your own independence from the broadcaster. The first is you treat YouTube as your first network. That's where you build your audience. That's where you prove your concept. And that's where you can start generating revenue immediately. The second one is you use crowdfunding both as validation and revenue. So it's a way to build your budget, but also when people pay for stuff, they feel like they have their skin in they have a bit of skin in the game, and they feel like they have some ownership there. You're thinking more, so rather than thinking about a relationship with a channel and persuading a TV channel to take pity on you and give you the money to make your series, you're having to think more like a TV channel yourself. So it's multiple income streams, merchandise, licensing, games, subscriptions. And then you're using your community a kind of a way to really get that backing and that support, but they're your focus group, they're your research, they're the feedback you immediately get. And that's always been that's one of the things that gives this thing an advantage over the traditional broadcasters. And I think you're going to find the traditional broadcasters are now moving in this direction themselves, which is you have an immediate feedback loop with your audience and you're able to iterate and improve and use that information to kind of make your shows better. And then the creators toolkit that you have to hand if you're looking to be a animator creator is you have software like Unreal Engine that allows you to do real-time rendering and to get animation produced very quickly. You have AI that allows you to test and iterate and brainstorm ideas. You have your community as your focus group, and you have social as your marketing strategy and your content distribution. And that's it. Sorry, I might have raced through the end of it, but so that's kind of to give you a sort of a snapshot on how a lot of modern creators are approaching distribution and funding. And I think one of the things I got a big impression from MIPS this year is that a lot of traditional broadcasters are talking more and more about having to approach things with a creator's mindset. So a lot of these strategies, even though they work very well for individual creators or small teams, I'm finding that more and more of the broadcasters and the big studios are having to utilize these strategies as well. Any questions?
How do you feel personally about the shift from traditional way of doing it to this way of like you can create your own stuff, you can put it on YouTube, and you might somehow get that £5 million?
There are definite pros and cons. I think it's quite a long path to building that audience, and that if you do persuade a broadcaster to back your project, you immediately get access to their audience, so you're not having to build the audience yourself. It reminds me of I saw an interview with a stand-up comedian. He said that when he first started, the broadcaster would come to a show and they'd say, "We think you've got loads of talent. We'd like to introduce your talent to our audience." And he said now the broadcaster will come to a show and they'll say, if you've got a large Instagram following or a large social media following, they'll say, "We'd like to introduce your following to our channel." And I think even though the traditional way of working had a lot going for it, the problem with it is that those channels can no longer promise the size of audience that they used to be able to promise. So in some ways, if you're comparing it to how the system used to work when it worked well, then there was a lot to be said for that traditional model. But I think, particularly around animation, there are fewer and fewer buyers. So this is an opportunity for people to start and kind of build that, build their own IP and be able to sort of sidestep that permission ladder that you have with the older model. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
Because I've got a 5-year-old kid, so I watch
Right.
a lot of YouTube.
Yeah. And does he watch it?
He loves it.
Right.
Loves it. And I'm an editor, so I've
Right.
edited kids' TV. So how he obviously watches YouTube Kids and it's an algorithm and it feeds in and feeds in. How do you cut through that noise if you've got this amazing product? How do you...
Yeah, that's the difficulty. And in some ways, even though there's an element where YouTube is without gatekeepers, and the algorithm is in its way a gatekeeper, and so that's the challenge really, is how do you get noticed? And I think you have to kind of build slowly, and you kind of build from kind of a small base, and then you hope that the algorithm picks up on stuff. But there's a lot of science that goes into how to get the algorithm to notice you. And one of the changes in the industry is that 5 years ago, the traditional broadcasters used to be dead against YouTube for obvious reasons. And now the thing that blows a lot of people's minds is the most popular TV channel in living rooms is YouTube.
Yeah, but definitely for my 5-year-old son.
And so I think people think, when you ask them what's the most popular connected TV channel, they'll say it's the BBC.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's YouTube, and that's not on your devices, that's on your living room screen, that means that that's become a place that everyone then is going to, the big players and the smaller independents. But the smaller independents they have almost as much of a shout as the bigger players on that on YouTube, and I think that's a real advantage.
A massive round of applause for Andy.
Thank you, guys.